Hey guys, so this week I got a two-part lesson for you. Part one will cover the two witnesses, and part two will be titled The Road to Megiddo. So just kind of seeing where we're at here, mapping the book of Revelation. The entire book, right, is kind of in sections. The first four chapters, kind of the pre-tribulation chapters. We talk about the messages to the churches, the throne of God, so on and so forth. Then we get into the meat of the book, the tribulation, which is covered from chapter 5 through chapter 11, as well as 12 through 14. 12 through 14 kind of coincides with chapters 5 and 6 to give you kind of a narrative to what's going on. Then the final part of the book is all focused on Jesus' return from chapter 15 on through 20, and then you get kind of the conclusion, chapter 21 through 22. So that's the whole book of Revelation, kind of in a nutshell. What we've covered so far is we've covered the pre-trib chapters already, most of the tribulation chapters all the way through chapter 9, as well as 12, 13, and 14. We did in the fall semester kind of jump ahead to chapter 17 and 18 when we were trying to unravel Mystery Babylon. We covered the fall of Babylon because we got details on what Babylon was. So we jumped ahead there. We did do those two chapters already. And we also covered chapter 21. We're discussing in fall semester about the life after death and heaven, because we got a good description of the city in heaven in chapter 21. So that's kind of where we are with the year coming here towards the end. What we're covering in these next two lessons is going to be chapter 10, chapter 11, which is pretty much the end of the tribulation, right before the return of Christ. Here's our timeline that we've been kind of cataloging as we go through the events of the tribulation. The seals covered in Revelations chapter 5 through 7, as well as chapter 12 through 14, and Matthew 24 giving us a narrative of how the seals kind of play out. The trumpets have been covered in Revelation chapter 8 through 11, where we've got in the first trumpet, we got hail, blood, and fire, consuming a third of the land on earth by fire. We got the second trumpet with an asteroid or comet hitting the ocean. The third trumpet, you get an asteroid comet hitting the land, destroying a third of the water supply. The fourth trumpet, you got the sky darkening so that the day becomes only 1/3 of light and the rest darkness. Then we covered the fifth trumpet, which was the first terror, the first of three terrors. In that first terror, we saw how these weird locust creatures come up from the abyss, led by an angel named Apollo, and they're allowed to torture for 5 months everybody who does not have the seal of God. And then we covered the sixth trumpet and the beginning of the second terror, where this 4 angels are released from the Euphrates River, and they lead an army of horsemen. It's kind of these weird Nephilim horsemen type army from the Euphrates, and go and take out 1/3 of the people on earth. So that's the beginning of the second terror. We're still in the second terror as we dive into the two witnesses and the road to the valley of Megiddo. So meditating on this, here's kind of the scenario I took the liberty of coming up with. I'm putting myself in that day, right? This huge horseman Nephilim army led by those 4 angels is going around the world during the time of the two witnesses. They're destroying everything in their path, as we read in the book of Joel. I can imagine during this time, many more are still taking the number of the beast and joining the Antichrist as they see these, judgments coming from God on the earth. But I could also see some people are still getting saved. People are still repenting, seeing the judgments, driving them to repentance and being saved. So I see this kind of going on as the two witnesses come on the scene. I see Israel praying as the army approaches the Holy Land. I see the Lord driving them away and not allow allowing them, to come into the Holy Land. That's just kind of me, my opinion on how I see this playing out. We are told a third of the current population during that time will be wiped out by that horseman army led by the four angels. And I can imagine that the Antichrist, meanwhile, as this is going on, is coming up with plans to combat Jesus upon his return. Satan knows Scripture. The Antichrist, no doubt, is going to know Scripture. He's going to know his time is short. And he's going to see, oh, wow, we're at the sixth trumpet. There's only one trumpet left, and the Lord returns with the last trumpet. So I can imagine a little anxiety in his part, knowing that, Jesus is coming, and he's probably going to be making, combat plans, making plans to meet Jesus when he returns. So that's kind of just in my mind how as I meditated on, the sixth trumpet and, the second terror, kind of how I see this actually playing out, in my head, if I was there when it happened. Okay, next chapter. So now we get into Revelation chapter 10, where it says, John sees another mighty angel coming down from heaven, surrounded by a cloud, with a rainbow over his head. His face is going to shine like the sun. His feet are like pillars of fire. In his hand, he's going to have a small scroll that's been opened. John says he saw him stand with his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land. And he gave a great shout like the roar of a lion. And when he shouted, the seven thunders answered. All right, kind of a gnarly vision there. When the seven thunders spoke, John was about to write what they said, but he was told, keep secret what the seven thunders said and do not write it down. So we have no idea what these words were. John did not write it down for us in Revelation, so not even going to try to speculate. We're not meant to know. It was kept until the end, so no idea. No idea what the seven thunders spoke. Going on, the angel standing on the sea and the land raised his right hand toward heaven. He swore an oath in the name of the one who lives forever and ever, who created the heavens and everything in them, the earth and everything in it, and the sea and everything in it. And he said, there will be no more delay. When the seventh angel blows his trumpet, God's mysterious plan will be fulfilled. It will happen just as he announced it to his servants, the prophets. All right. So it looks like we're at this point. He's basically announcing we're coming down to the end, to the final trumpet. Then the voice from heaven spoke to John again. He said, go and take the open scroll from the hand of the angel who is standing on the sea and on the land. And so John went to the angel and told him to give him the small scroll. The angel said, yes, take it and eat it. It will be sweet as honey in your mouth, but it will turn sour in your stomach. So John took the small scroll from the hand of the angel and he ate it. It was sweet in his mouth. Then he swallowed it and it turned sour in his stomach. Imagine that. Then he was told, you must prophesy again about many people, nations, languages, and kings. And he did, right? We got the book of Revelation from John. Never know what actually happened to John after the island of Patmos, but I can imagine he went and, somehow got back to the seven churches to deliver this message and to, prophesy about the events coming at the end. Okay, then we get into chapter 11. Chapter 10, that's kind of a, little interlude there with that angel. Not got much to say about it. Chapter 11, John was then given a measuring stick and was told, go and measure the temple of God and the altar and count the number of worshipers. But do not measure the outer courtyard, for it has been turned over to the nations. They will trample the holy city for 42 months. So here we go. Here's another 3.5 years, 42 months. Seems to be the second half now of the tribulation that we're getting into. So 3.5 months in the beginning was the time of the Antichrist, where he was allowed to do whatever he wanted. Then we had all those events in the middle with the sixth seal opening and the trumpets coming forth and the four trumpets. being blasted, and then the first terror, and then the second terror with the sixth trumpet, and then now we're kind of going to the second half, the next 42 months, or the next 3.5 years, where John's told that these two witnesses will be given power, and they will be clothed in burlap, and they will prophesy during those 1,260 days, which equates to 3.5 years. All right, so these two witnesses are going to be given 3.5 years to prophesy, and this will be the second 3.5 years of the 7-year tribulation. So going back to our timeline of events, just to kind of recage, right? So you see here with the trumpets, you get about half a year, it seems like, between the first 5 trumpets. I say that only because, the only timeline we're given there is with the 5th trumpet, where we're told that those locusts are allowed to torture for 5 months. So you get the 4 trumpets blast, and then you get these locusts that come out on the 5th, and there's a 5-month period where they're allowed to torture. So, about half a year. And then the 6th trumpet blows, you get the 4 angels from the Euphrates, the horsemen start wreaking havoc, and these two witnesses appear, and they're given 42 months or 3.5 years to witness. So here you get a kind of a full tribulation timeline of 7 years, actually 7.5 years, which makes sense, right? If the tribulation were to start, let's say, in the spring equinox with the spring festivals, and go 7 years, and then end with the fall festivals on the 7th year, but 6 months later, because the fall festivals is in the 7th month, then you would get 7.5 years total. You'd still say it's a 7-year tribulation, but time-wise, it'll be about 7.5 years. So, maybe that kind of explains it. So there we get some kind of a timeline to this tribulation and how long it kind of lasts. Okay, going back to these two witnesses. So who are they? Who are these two guys, that are going to, for the last 3.5 years before the Lord returns, are going to just sit there and prophesy with power? Who are they? We're told that the two prophets are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands that stand before the Lord of all the earth. So it's like, what the heck does that mean? 2 olive trees? I don't get it, right? Well, if you have to go back to the Old Testament prophecies to know what is being meant here. John would have known because he knew his Old Testament. And when he saw 2 olive trees, or he heard, I should say, about these 2 prophets being the 2 olive trees, he probably remembered about Zechariah chapter 4, or in Zechariah chapter 4, Zechariah the prophet sees 2 olive trees, one on each side of the bowl, and he sees a golden lampstand. So that would have triggered in John's mind, about these 2 prophets. Okay, so the 2 olive trees on each side of the lampstand. The rest of Zechariah, towards the end of chapter 4, verse 11 through 14, Zechariah actually asked the angels, what are those? What are the 2 olive trees on each side of the lampstands? What do they represent? And what are the 2 olive branches that pour golden oil through the golden tubes? Do you know? The angel responds, don't you know? Don't you know, Zechariah, what these 2 olive trees are? And Zechariah's like, no, my Lord, I don't, right? That's why I'm asking. And so the angel tells Zechariah the answer to the riddle that John receives in his vision. He says they represent the 2 anointed ones who stand in the court of the Lord of all the earth. So where do these 2 witnesses come from? No, referring to Zechariah chapter 4, they come from heaven. Because Zechariah chapter 4, we're told they stand in the court of the Lord of all the earth up in heaven. So these 2 witnesses are going to come down from heaven during the second terror, and they're going to prophesy for 42 months or 3.5 years. So, but still the question remains, who are these 2 guys that are going to come down from heaven and prophesy for 3.5 years. Well, I thought about it, and many people have thought about it. The first one that comes to mind, of course, is always Elijah. He's got the strongest case, in my opinion, referring to the prophecy back in Malachi chapter 4, where Malachi is told that the prophet Elijah will be sent by God before the great and dreadful day of the Lord arrives. So that day of the Lord being the day when, God's judgment is fully poured out on the earth. Malachi was told before that Elijah is going to come back, and his preaching will turn the hearts of fathers to their children and the hearts of children to their fathers. Otherwise, I will come and strike the land with a curse. So good argument for Elijah being one of the two witnesses. If you remember what happened to Elijah, he never died. He was actually carried by a whirlwind into heaven, as you read in 2 Kings chapter 2, where he was walking and a chariot of fire appeared, if you remember, drawn by horses of fire, by these angels. It separated him from his apprentice, Elisha. And Elisha saw Elijah be carried up into heaven in a whirlwind. He was basically raptured up to heaven without dying. So, he's up there. It would make sense that he's coming back as the Lord promised in Malachi. So I think at least for one of the two witnesses, there's a very strong case that one of them will be the prophet Elijah. Okay, so the second guy, here's another option, Enoch. If you remember from Genesis chapter 5, in that genealogy chapter that people usually skip over, there's a hidden gem in there when you get to the life of Enoch, that it says he lived 365 years walking in close fellowship with God, and then one day he disappeared because God took him. So Enoch also did not die, and God just took him. In the Dead Sea Scrolls in the book of Joshua, you get a little bit more detailed of exactly how this happened. We're told in Joshua that he ascended into heaven in a whirlwind with horses and chariots of fire. That sound familiar? Sounds exactly the way Elijah the prophet was taken up in the book of Kings, by a whirlwind and horses and chariots of fire. It's the same way Enoch, Genesis 5, was taken up. So here, these two guys were taken up to heaven without dying. New Testament, Hebrews chapter 11, proclaims this as well, that it was by faith that Enoch was taken up to heaven without dying. He disappeared because God took him. So there we go. We got two guys in the scripture that did not die. However, Hebrews chapter 9 says that just as each person is destined to die once, after that comes judgment. So everybody's destined to die, even these two guys, Elijah and Enoch. However, they did not die. They were raptured up to heaven. And you're going to see at the end of the 3.5 years when we get there, that the two witnesses are actually going to be killed by the Antichrist. But that's jumping ahead. So Elijah and Enoch were the only two that I know of, the only two recorded in the Bible that were taken up to heaven without dying. So good argument there that those are the two that will come back to witness at the end, and then they will be killed and die. So to every man is appointed to die once. So there's a good argument for Elijah and Enoch being the two witnesses that we see in Revelation. Now let's throw another one into the mix. How about Moses? All right, Moses did die, but I throw in Moses because if you remember in the book of Luke, when Jesus and his top three, I guess Peter, John, and James, go up to Mount Hermon. They go up to the top of a mountain, and Jesus gets transfigured on the mountain. They go up there to pray, if you remember the story. And while Jesus was praying, his appearance of his face changed and was transformed. His clothes became dazzling white. He basically started shining. And then suddenly two men appeared, Moses and Elijah. There's Elijah again. But Elijah is not with Enoch. He's with Moses when he appears at the top of the mountain there where Jesus was transfigured. And the two of them appeared and they began talking with Jesus, glorious to see. And they were speaking about his exodus from this world, which was about to be fulfilled in Jerusalem. So they were kind of talking about, hey, from here on out, you're on your way to Jerusalem to complete your task, your task on the cross. So Moses and Elijah. So it begs the question, why those two? Could it be that we know Elijah, pretty certain he's one of the two witnesses? Could Moses be the second witness that's coming back in Revelation 9 as a prophet? Possible. Some more evidence for the Moses case, I guess. In verse 6 of chapter 11, it says those two witnesses have the power to shut the sky so that no rain will fall for as long as they prophesy. So actually that goes towards, Elijah. As you see in Luke 4, Elijah, during his time, he was actually able to close the heavens for 3.5 years. You remember the story back in the Old Testament. It's in the book of 1 Kings, chapter 18, where Elijah basically, stopped rain for 3.5 years. And towards the end of it, he prayed for the rain to be restored. And when he prayed, this little cloud rose up from the sea, came, and before you knew it, it was raining again. So he had the power to control the rain. So just like in Revelation 11, when it says these two prophets have the power to shut the sky so that no rain will fall for as long as they prophesy. Coincidence? 3.5 years. When Elijah did it in the book of Kings, it was 3.5 years according to the book of Luke. And it'll be 3.5 years that he prophesies in Revelation 11. You know what I've told you guys before about my belief in coincidence, right? There's no coincidence. Everything has a purpose. So I think the first part of that verse 6 speaks to Elijah and his power to shut the sky. But the second part of verse 6 says that the witnesses also have the power to turn the rivers and oceans into blood. So who in the Old Testament did that before? And to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they wish. Well, you got it, Moses, right? Moses was able to turn the whole Nile River into blood in the book of Exodus. You remember when he brought the plagues on Egypt, he was also able to strike Egypt with every kind of plague. Plague of frogs, gnats, flies, livestock, boils, hail, locusts, interesting, locusts, darkness, right? So you can see where there's a good argument for Moses as well, according to what the capabilities of these two witnesses are. The two witnesses, according to Revelation, are able to shut the sky so no rain falls, turn water into blood, and bring about all these plagues. Well, the Old Testament, Elijah was able to shut the sky, and Moses was able to turn water into blood and bring on plagues. So good argument there for Moses possibly being the second witness there. So I think it's pretty solid Elijah is one of them. Again, the second one, I don't know. It's a toss-up between Enoch, who was raptured just like Elijah, or between Moses, in my opinion, who has the power of the plagues described in Revelation 11. So, or maybe it's two other guys that I'm not even talking about and I don't even know about. So, share your opinion. Put it in the comments, or when we meet for class, let me know what you guys think on who these two guys are. Okay, gonna end this lesson and then stay tuned shortly for part 2, which is the road to Megiddo, where I'm going to cover some Old Testament prophecies in the book of Zechariah and Daniel, which kind of sets the stage for the final battle of Armageddon after the Lord returns. God bless.